guys, so today I'm going to be showing you guys how to install a subwoofer into your car. More specifically, I'm going to be showing you guys how to install a sub into a car with a factory head unit. So first of all, you're going to need this. This is a high to low impedance converter. Basically what this does is it takes the high level signal coming out of the speakers, which we're going to be using to send a signal to our amp and then to our sub. So the goal of this thing is to take the noisy signal coming out of the back of my head unit going to the speakers and turn it into something that this thing might be able to read. So besides that, obviously you're going to need your actual sub. So in my case, I'm using a Kicker Comp S 10-inch sub, and I'm also using a Pyle PLA-2200 as my amplifier. There's a lot of different ones in the market. This is a pretty cheap setup. You also want to have something to secure it, in my opinion. Not everyone does this, but I think it's a good idea, so I'm using Velcro. And you definitely want to secure your sub with something, Velcro or otherwise, because you don't want your sub using the back of your car as a slip and slide. You're also going to need a soldering iron, especially if you're splicing into the factory harness to get signal for your amp. There's other ways to do that. You can get a little like splicing kit thing that I don't know what they're called, but there are these little like tabs that splice into your lines, and then you can run a wire out of them. They're solderless, but I'm actually going to be cutting my wires and then resoldering them and then getting my signal from that. So I need a soldering iron and solder, recommend lead free, and then also because we're going to be splicing wires and such, always a good idea to use heat shrink instead of electric tape for the most professional install. And last but not least is your wiring kit. And I want to emphasize this one because you can cheap out on a lot of stuff, right? Like, we're not installing that expensive a sub, definitely not an expensive amp. You can cheap out on certain aspects of this build, even the high to low impedance converter I got pretty cheap. But this, you don't want to cheap out on this. Please don't cheap out on your wiring kit. A lot of the cheaper kits you see on eBay and otherwise, like they claim to be, for instance, 8 gauge, which this is, and then you get the actual wire and you look at it. If you look closely at a lot of these wires, they're actually not the gauge they say they are. And of course, that's a problem because if we're pumping more current through a wire than what it can handle, it's going to heat up. I'm sure that your mixtapes are all fire, but we don't want your mixtape to literally set your car on fire. So please invest at least a little bit of money into a quality wiring kit. Okay, so first thing I'm doing here is removing the vent so I can get to the 2 screws by the head unit. Once these 2 screws are removed, I can just kind of pop out the head unit. It comes out with some gentle persuasion, and I can get access to the back of the head unit where the speaker lines are that I'm going to tap into. Once I have access to the back of the head unit where the wires are, I can go ahead and splice into the wires and cut them so that I can strip them back, reconnect them, and solder them to the inputs of the line-out converter. Once I'm finished with the soldering, I can go ahead and throw some heat shrink on and clean everything up and get ready to plug everything back in for adjusting the actual line-out converter. So what I've done in order to test the line-out converter and make adjustments is connect a headphone input adapter to the RCA outputs from the line-out converter. And my goal with this is to listen to the signal coming out of the line-out converter and try and get as strong as a signal as I possibly can from the speaker lines while minimizing distortion and clipping. And I'm going to continue to make adjustments here, playing with the levels from the line-out converter until I feel that I'm getting a signal which is strong but still minimizes distortion and clipping. There are more professional ways of doing this, but if you don't have special equipment like an oscilloscope, then this is kind of the next best thing. Now that I have my line-out converter set to where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and look for a place to run my remote wire. So the remote wire is going to be what we use to turn the amp on and off so we don't drain our battery. In this case, I'm probing with my multimeter and I'm looking around for a place on the back of the head unit in the same harness I spliced into the speaker wires for a wire that's running 12 volts only when the key is turned on. Once I find this wire, I'm going to go ahead and splice into it with a solderless quick connector. I decided to use the solderless quick connector for the remote wire since I felt it didn't need as strong of a connection as the line-out converter to these speaker wires did. Now that I have my remote wire running to the back of my car and it has a good 12 volt source that turns on when the key's on, I'm going to go ahead and install my power cable. So the power cable is going to run all the way up to the battery in the front of the car. And so there's a lot of different ways you can run this. But in my case, I just ran the wire through the grommet where my hood release is. This is kind of a common thing to do with this type of car. So it'll really depend on what kind of car you have and what you want to do. For anything bigger than 8 gauge, I would definitely recommend drilling a new hole into the firewall though. Now that I have the power cable running through the firewall up to the battery, I'm going to go ahead and install my fuse. You always want to run your fuse near where the battery is, no more than 2 feet down the connector from where it initially attaches to the positive terminal of your battery. Now that I have my power cable running through to the front of the car by the battery, I'm also going to go ahead and install my ground cable. Now the ground cable you want to be as close as possible to the amp. In my case I used a short 2 foot long cable, and in my case I decided to use one of the bolts holding my seat in place in the back. It would also be a good time to mention that it's generally considered to be good practice to run your signal wires, meaning in my case my RCA wires, on one side of my car, and then your power cables on the other side. Face to face. So now that I have all the wiring running to the back of the car and where I need it to be, and I've tested everything, make sure that it works, I'm mounting up the amp, and I've decided to simply mount the amp to the back of the sub. This is kind of a popular thing to do if you don't want to mount it permanently inside of the car. So all I'm doing here is putting a piece of wood on the back of the amp, screwing it in, and then mounting the amp to that piece of wood. As well as mounting the amp to the back of the sub, I'm also screwing in a couple pieces of Velcro so that the sub has something to stick to the carpet of my trunk to. And now finally I can actually go and install the subwoofer. So I'm going to throw the subwoofer with the amp mounted into the trunk and just connect everything up to where it's labeled on the amp. And once that's done, I can actually do a test and then finally put everything back together and clean everything up. One last thing that I wanted to do as well with this install was actually install a switch that cuts off the power going to the remote line, and I wanted to do this so that if I ever got tired of listening to my sub, or if I had a passenger that was getting sick of it, I could just go ahead and flick it off easily. That's all there is to it. That's how you install a subwoofer to a factory head unit. I'm thinking about doing a video after this where I explain a little bit about actually tuning the subwoofer without special equipment like an oscilloscope or anything fancy like that, just listening to the sub by ear and tuning it like that. But that is all you need to actually install the hardware into your car. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and subscribe for more.